I mean, I have put, I mean, you can expand this to be whatever you want. Yeah. I would say the person that you're working most closely with on the project, like your customer, I would say is your sponsor. Right. Right. Exactly. Right.
They all going to have reliable access to
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you should do what makes sense for your project, but. Right, exactly. Right. And, right, exactly. That's why I usually identify both, because I think it's important to know who's approving the funds for this project or the resources for this project, and then who are you working with to get it done. Yeah, totally. So maybe we should add that to the template.
we have generally universal interest, or do we have very
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm assuming that the project sponsor is the agent of the executive sponsor in like the day-to-day dealing.
right? So this is a legacy business process.
Yeah.
Solution.
And you're in the.
So something still something
Right.
business process.
Right. Okay. All right. So, how did that feel?
Felt like I was doing my job.
All right. That's good. So were you able to understand the value of the project that the person was talking about?
Yes.
All right. Good. And was anybody surprised by the answers that the questions evoked? Did it seem easier to get information? Harder?
I think it was easier. It honed in on some specifics that I would probably not get in more of just conversation.
Okay. Good. I'll pay you later.
So I have a question. So
Okay.
you see now, I heard it before. I think Madeline, thank you. I think I heard it before that this is really a contract, right? That we want with them. So, but where do we get any artifacts? You know, say this person reviewed and approved such and so date, and then how often do we review it, right? Because in a large project, that's not a static thing, right?
Correct. It can change. Yeah.
Could you repeat the question or the summary of it?
Sure. Louise was asking, so for large projects, the charter could change over time depending on what happens on the project. And then how do you ensure approval was kind of the other part.
Get an artifact that my stakeholder has approved. This is our criteria that we're going to be judging against.
Right.
Because I've seen many projects go south where so the stakeholders say, I never saw that or signed that, right?
Right. So a little bit of history, yeah.
Did we ever have an approval section on there or change section?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. So, God, you guys are reading my mind today. So yeah, so the charter, I believe, a long time ago, actually used to have a signature line on it, but it was determined that people weren't actually like then there was questions about, well, once it's signed, where do we put it? Should we, scan it, all that kind of stuff. So I think we took it off, and then we just said that, you should get an email, or if you get approval in person, you should send an email afterwards confirming that, yes, they're approving this charter per our conversation, just to kind of, if there's, if that's not true, then please respond by a certain date. And then if they don't respond, then you're basically covered. I think that's how we envisioned it without the signature line. It's really kind of up to you and your relationship with your sponsor how best to get that, I guess, commitment. If it helps people, you can add a signature line to the charter if you want them to actually have it signed and then scan it in. It's fine too. Yeah.
So one thing that's going to be coming up pretty soon on this is records management and looking at things that are essential records or things that need to be preserved. Project charters is one thing. So if we don't have a signature on the project charter, those emails must be pulled out of your email, attached to the project, put back up in the records management, and recorded and preserved. So I would like to suggest that we put a signature line back on there. If we need to do revisions, at least we get signatures back on there, and it can be pulled back into records management for preservation and stuff to show that those are official documents. Because all these project documents are official county work documents that we need to preserve. So rather than doing a bunch of emails, I would highly encourage you to start doing that, and probably find out more about this middle of November as we start working on essential records with the group stuff. And essential records is going to put out more information on this kind of stuff.
Okay. Did everybody hear that? Okay. Karen, can you make a note?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I document that in meeting minutes, because you have a project team, you've discussed it. That's where I put it. Charter's approved. Yeah, charter approved by sponsor or product owner by whomever it is. It goes in the meeting minutes. That's why I put it in the meeting minutes. So I don't track
Okay.
it in an email.
So they would have to be part of the archive, the records archive that Brad was talking about too then? Yeah. Okay. And then as far as revisions to it, I guess I'm conflicted on that because I feel like the charter should be high enough level that you don't need to revise it. But, I guess even with the DART project, we wound up doing a split go live, which I didn't go back and update the charter, I guess, to reflect that. Maybe I should have. I don't know. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? I don't really have a good answer for that, honestly.
The charter is to get you going, and it doesn't necessarily mean it is the guiding map for all along. It's just to get everybody on the same page to start the project.
Right, right. But if that destination changes, then maybe the charter should change.
Or you can document it in your change management
Yeah,
documentation.
yeah.
And I think those are, sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
What's the purpose of the charter? If the purpose is to say what we did in the end, as opposed to having the application tell you that, or pivotal, or whatever other artifacts you're using to say this is what actually, or plan view who shows you what your final costs were. If it's something to, I wouldn't have, personally, I wouldn't want to have to go back and edit everything based on all the other artifacts that are used, what actually was the end.
Right.
I feel the same way too.
Yeah.
For me, the charter is the North Star. And when you get off course, you go, oh, what did we say we were going to do? Oh, we said we were going to do A, but actually we're going to do B. And I document the B somewhere else. That's what I do.
Especially in agile projects.
Yeah, you can have a charter for an agile project, but you describe, hey, we're doing an agile project, and these are the stories we're going to start with, or whatever. But I would document the change elsewhere, because there's too many things that change to go back and edit the charter every single time.
I agree, but let me give a scenario.
Yeah.
Particular for, I'll use Justin's, Carrie brought it up, Justin. Justin's what, 2+ year project, right? So what if we start, with a project charter saying, our goal is to replace this using this technology by so-and-so date. But a year and a quarter from now, right? Oh, by the way, another critical success factor is we need to have it mobile ready. So is that something that should go in the charter? But a critical success factor of the project, should that be documented elsewhere, so.
I would put that in a change control. I mean, it's so big that you could say, and you have to redo the budget as a result, right? So, I mean, there's money impacts. I would put it elsewhere.
I mean, I feel like we're also talking about elements of the communication plan as well. So those are all sorts of things where I would be documenting with the stakeholder or the sponsor, you know, how do you want to know about these things? If these things happen, how do you want that to be documented? If your stakeholder is looking at the charter as the way, if they're paying attention to it as a useful artifact to help guide them, then put it there. If they're paying attention to something else, or you feel that the charter is an important CYA because you know that this sponsor is, you know, squirrely, then definitely put it there. But it seems to me that it's also, there's elements of what is your ongoing check-in of both progress and quality with the sponsor that could be contained there as well.
Well, and I'm just trying to reconcile two ideas, right? And I like everything I've heard, right? So on one side, right, this is my contract with my customer, right?
Yeah.
But if that contract's out of date, right?
Yeah, but it's been amended. Your change control is your amendment,
Okay.
basically. And then at the end of the day, I think it's nice to keep the charter intact in a way, because when you do the closed summary, you go back and you look at the goals of the charter, and you know how close did you come.
Okay.
So.
If you think of it, we're building a building, your charter is your original plan design, and any modification or change to your as-built, your change control. So you've got your original design that you bought off on, and everything else is documented, it just flows back in there. But
That analogy works on a waterfall project.
Yes.
It's not accurate on an agile project.
yes, that is highly true. And that's where we're getting more into an agile product, so how do these documents evolve with that?
Mhm.
I mean, you brought up change control, for instance. I don't do change control on an agile project.
Yeah.
There isn't any such thing in agile as change control.
I've done it only to cover myself for the sponsor approving the additional work. Because we started with a charter and a promise of an amount rather than the features being delivered, which is agile. But it's in the construct of a waterfall sort of project management
And
thing,
that's
so.
where, in some cases, we get into some
I
of a
know.
hybrid model around some of those.
Right.
Especially if there's budgets. I mean, if I'm working on a project that's pure internal service rates, budget, the only real cost is opportunity cost. It's about duration more than effort or budget.
Right, but I still think on an agile project, I mean, if the customer thinks they're going to get something in a year, I mean, I guess,
Really,
I mean,
agile, they're the ones making the decision about when to deliver.
right, but I guess I still think, like, for the Just project, like, there was minimal viable product features that I think you could put in a charter that won't necessarily change. And then, again, you're not listing necessarily milestones, but you might list how you're going to approach the project. You're going to do 2-week sprints, and you expect the product owner to do these things. I mean, you can, you know, I still think it's how you're going to do the project. I mean, if it's a true agile, you wouldn't even have a project, right? You have a product.
I wouldn't say that. We do greenfield development from scratch. In fact, I would say most of our agile projects are greenfield development.
What do you mean by greenfield development? Sorry.
We're starting from scratch. There's nothing there. We're creating something.
Right, you're creating a product.
You still have product vision.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. I'm not saying we don't have
So
those,
instead of a
or
charter.
that we don't do a charter. I think the charter means something different to my customers than it would mean on the waterfall.
Yes, I would agree. But I would still hope that just because we're a public entity, sometimes we have to be fiscally responsible, and I think it's helpful to have an idea, even for an agile project, what that's going to look like when you're done. Because by definition, a project has a beginning and an end. So you should know what you're driving towards in the end. And yes, that may change, but you should have an idea of what that North Star is going to look like. Okay. So don't have great answers. I think, you know, a lot of what project management is tailoring the tools that we have to meet the needs of your project. So I don't know if there's a one-size-fits-all answer to any of these questions. I think it's great conversation and good things to think about. But I'm hesitant to say it's A or B, because I think it really depends on your situation and what type of project you're looking at. Okay. So, you had your initial sponsor meeting before you go running from the room, which is, you know, when you have those kind of conversations, sometimes you want to run from the room. I would say, again, set expectations for what they should expect next. Isn't that a great visual? I love that picture. She is running out a window. So I would say to them, you know, I'm gonna meet with my project team. I'm gonna finish this charter. I'm gonna come back to you with, you know, what it's fleshed out to be, and would like your approval on it. That might be in 2 to 3 weeks. You know, give them a time frame. Maybe ask them if you had questions that come up for you between now and then. Can you just call them? Is it email better? Like, how do they want to be contacted? They're usually very busy people. And also have that conversation about how you want to work together going forward, which will feed into your communication plan. All right, so we have our guide, we've met with them, we have a start to our map. What's next? Who's going to go on this journey with you? Who's going to go hiking up this mountain? Well, that's your core team or your project team. Call it whatever you want, but it's the people that you're going to work closely with day to day to get the work done. Typically for us in IT, it's made up of IT representatives. You might have people from network services. You might have DBAs, BSAs, developers, anybody that's going to work on the project. But it typically also has customer representatives who usually provide that subject matter expertise when you need it. They might represent, you might have more than one on your team. They might represent different sections of the department that's going to be impacted by the product, and they're kind of representing that group and what their needs are. They might be going to help you with the training for the new business processes, for example. So it might be a train-the-trainer kind of situation. So you want to kind of get all them in a room and have a core team kickoff meeting. Before we go over that, take a look at these 4 pictures. Which hiking expedition would you want to be on and why?
Would you say that again, please?
Which hiking expedition, which group of hikers would you want to be on and why?
Is that a vehicle number 4?
Is that a what?
A vehicle number 4?
A vehicle?
It looks like a vehicle.
No, they're giant backpacks.
Okay. Because that would have been it for me if it's a vehicle.
Yeah.
I like 3 because you don't have to carry anything.
Except for shoes.
I want 4 because they all look organized and prepared.
More snacks in 4.
There looks like there's children in shoes.
Juice.
I don't hide for children.
Awesome. All right, I'm hearing some 4s. Anybody other than 4? 4?
Still go with 2. Looks like room to operate.
2, room to operate. All right.
So, chaos manager right here. That's that one.
All right.
Yeah.
That is the chaos.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's kids on that team.
I tended to like 4 too, just because everybody's going in the same direction. We're all on a path. We have equipment. Looks like they have equipment. They have food, potentially.
There's no variety though.
No variety.
They have the horizon in view.
That's true, yes. They know where they're going. Top of the hill there. So how do we get everyone going in the right direction on a project for your core team? And I recommend doing the core team meeting. Oh yeah, have a meeting and brag with food. That's one way to do it. You can have, I usually have food at my core team kickoff. That's usually helpful. But this is where you can start to engage that project team, especially if it's a team that you haven't worked for or worked with before. It's a good way to kind of get everybody, start that storming, norming, forming cycle. If it's a team that you work with all the time, this may be less important, but you still might want to meet and talk about if the roles and responsibilities are going to be different on this project, you know, what the end goal is, what are some of our constraints. But I like to also do a working agreement again if it's a team you haven't worked with before. I don't know if anybody has ever done a working agreement with their team before. I'll talk a little bit more about what that is and what that looks like later. I have also met with people individually outside of the core team meeting and asked them what their hopes for are getting, what they want to get out of the project. Do they want to learn something new? And also maybe what they see going wrong to help drive the risks in the charter. Sometimes people are less willing to give information in a meeting section setting. So sometimes it's nice to meet with them individually to kind of say, hey, what do you really, you know, what do you think is going to happen? What should we plan for? But the goal of this again is to get everybody on the same path, know what they're going to do on this project, and get that momentum going. People are starting to reach their goals. So roles and responsibilities, I have a link to the template that's out in the project management template folder, but there's many different formats for doing roles and responsibilities. So if we're going to go camping, I don't know how many of you have ever gone camping and everybody brought a stove and nobody brought a pot. So it's kind of good in your roles and responsibilities to kind of divvy out. It's basically dividing and conquer, right? Somebody's going to be the navigator. They're going to have the compass. They're going to have the maps. Somebody's going to be the cook. They're going to bring the stove and the pots. Each camper is responsible for bringing their own plates and utensils. And then somebody for safety if you want a first aid kit. You can also do a RACI. You guys familiar with the RACI? You can define people as having responsibility, accountable, consulting, and or informed, or as I like to be the doer, the buck stops here in the loop and keeping them in the same, in the picture. Here's another format. You can do roles and responsibilities by project phase if you want. It's another way to do it. And this, I think, is from our template. You just list out the roles and the different responsibilities. Having this conversation might actually drive your resources. So a lot of times when you talk about roles and responsibilities, you realize that you have a role that you don't have filled by anybody on your team. So you have a new role that you need to add to your charter. Team working agreements I have done in the past for large core teams to define basically how we're going to work together. So this includes decision making. How do we want to make decisions together? Is it going to be by consensus? Is there going to be one final say? Who is that? Talk about work-work balance. Usually when you have a core team that consists of people from your customers' departments, they have their day job still, so we want to respect that. And how's that going to work? How are we going to support them when they have way too much to do? How are we going to problem solve? And how are we going to resolve conflicts? How do we want to do that? I guarantee if you bring this to a core team meeting, you're going to get this response from some people. I have seen it. But I really think that it's helpful. I really think it gets everybody on the same page. It sets expectations. And, you know, if you need to, if you have somebody that's going rogue, you can go back to the agreement, it's documented, and say, hey, you know, we agreed that everybody was going to come to the stand-ups and you're repeatedly not coming. You know, help them kind of see that they're letting the rest of the team down.
I generally put in those agreements that it's everybody's responsibility to raise violations of those agreements without any fear of repercussions.
Yeah. Did y'all hear that?
Yeah.
He said that in his working agreements, he puts in there to that it's anybody can raise violations without consequences.
Is this something that you bring kind of pre-defined or something you work with the team to define so everybody kind of feels like they have a say
Yes.
in what that process is?
Yeah. Typically, I start with a blank slate,
Okay.
and I have used I've made use of talent development. They will facilitate for you, so you can participate, and that's helpful to have a third party actually facilitate that discussion. So that's a resource available to you. Okay. Yes, and sorry, go ahead.
Do you have examples of good applications of the RACI in this context? Is that something that you see being used well?
For roles and responsibilities?
Yeah.
I can look. Can you? Nope. I will look and see if I can find a good example.
Okay.
I'm sure we have one. There's probably some out in the.
Okay, cool.
I
Yeah.
just have a quick comment. I've been chasing down an incident recently and looking at some old documentation that was done by other people. I notice a lot in like our RACI matrices or in our support documents, we just put people's names and like not what team they're on or anything like that. And a lot of the documentation I was looking at was from like 2 years ago, and those people don't even work at the county anymore. And I have no idea like
What team it was.
team they used to be on or what group that's for, and it makes it really difficult to chase things down. So if you want to put individual names, that's cool, but could we also put like what team they're on, so
Yeah.
you have a starting point?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Did you make a note of that?
Well, I think that's where the RACI chart excels.
Right, but it literally
But-
just says someone's name, it doesn't say like a team.
Right.
Like, if that person's gone or they're
Or a function.
moved, I have no idea.
Okay, and then for the working agreement also, if it's an agile project, this could be where you talk as a team about how you want to do your sprints and all, you know, all that kind of stuff can be talked about in the meeting. Okay. So how that meeting, so you have a bunch of smart people in the room. Some other information might come out of those discussions that are going to drive your charter. So for example, they might, talking about your sprints and your sprint planning and how that might shake out, could influence your milestone section. There might be more critical success factors that come up because you're talking about how you're going to work together, so that might bring out some things that the team needs to be successful. And they also might bring up some risk, some things that might go wrong. What about this? What about that? And you might want to start planning for that. Okay, so we have our guide. We've got our hiking team. Next is your safety net. And I look at the steering committee as your safety net. Who are you going to go to when you're really in trouble? And it's going to keep you from falling. So I realize not every project is maybe big enough to have a safety net, but there still might be that one person that you feel like you can go to and kind of bounce ideas off of, get their opinions, feedback based on their previous experience. So if you're going to have a steering committee, I would have a steering committee kickoff. Who are you going to call? And the purpose of the kickoff is to provide them information about what the project is going to look like. You're also going to talk about what you see their role is in the project. So they're going to be maybe a tiebreaker if you and the sponsor can't agree and you need to take it to somebody else to kind of maybe get their input on. They might be able to advocate for more resources for you or different resources from different teams if that's what you need to get to the next step. In the kickoff meeting, I typically cover the usuals at a high level, the scope, schedule, budget, the resources that you need. Again, discuss their role in the on the project. And I would also talk to them about how they want to be kept informed. How often do they want to meet with you? Is it typically monthly? If it's less or more than that they want to stay in touch with the project, and how they want to be communicated with. And again, that's going to form your communication plan. Yeah?
I've always, up until now, I've always had the kickoff for the project team separate from the kickoff from the steering committee. But recently I was thinking of having it jointly together. Have you ever done that? I mean, I can think of pros and cons, but I was wondering if you or anybody else has had a joint kickoff and how that's gone.
I have not. Has anybody else had a joint kickoff with the steering committee and core team meeting?
Unintentionally.
Unintentionally? Doesn't look like it. You can let us know how it goes.
Yeah, I'm thinking of doing it, because I find sometimes, not always, but sometimes the project team has this, might not really understand the role of the steering committee, and if they were, and vice versa. And I think sometimes the steering committee seems like this far off, powerful people in the cloud, and I thought it might actually help to have them together.
Okay.
Yeah,
But then it would be, awfully large. It's helpful. It's helpful sometimes, I think, to see how decisions get made and who are those characters.
It seemed like it could depend a lot on the who's as
Yeah.
well, right? Because I think the obvious sort of worry about that would be that the creativity and team building of the project team would be constrained if somebody that they had a less than positive relationship that oversaw their work was present in the room or something of that nature.
There are definitely pros and cons.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Karen said that she's brought people to the steering committee from the project team.
Yeah,
Okay. So your steering committee meeting, your steering committee kickoff meeting, again, could influence some of the aspects of the charter. They might bring something up that's happened on a past project that they were on that is similar to your project that you might want to add as a risk. It would definitely influence your communication plan. Okay, so we've met with our sponsor, we've met with the core team, we've met with our steering committee, we have a charter defined, communication plan, roles and responsibilities. What's next? You're about to embark on this journey. You need to do a safety check. I'm calling that presenting to demand planning. And this is where you present your charter to go open active. So it's another group of people that can give you some input on what you've defined. They might think of other risks. Brad will ask about disaster recovery. I had to do it. So when you present a demand planning, it really should be 5 minutes. It's not a long presentation. The important thing is to highlight basically what the project's for, what's the business value of it, why are we doing it, what resources you need, because that's probably going to most affect the people that are in the room. I would call out any unusual risks that you see with the project. I wouldn't, call out the usual is nobody's going to have time to work on it, all that kind of stuff. But if there's something unusual about that you want people to be on the lookout for, then the people in the room can help you do that. And what else do I have on Likewise with the stakeholders, if there's an unusual stakeholder, for example, if the chair is a stakeholder in one of our projects, I would call that out. Because that might be good to know, because that's going to elevate the visibility of that project. And definitely don't read the project charter verbatim. Just summarize the different sections, and you know, they'll have a link to it in the demand planning agenda if they want to read it later. So that's your safety check. So now we're ready to go. You have your project sponsor, you have your charter or your map for the project agreed upon of how you're going to get there. You have your team ready to go. They know what to do first. And you have done your final safety check. So take a few minutes, talk to your partner. Think about a project that didn't go smoothly for you. Is there something that you learned today that you wish you had done on that project? And if so, what was it? So just take a few minutes, exchange ideas.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I think
Finish your project, yeah, this is all it is. Because that's the thing, when it's done,
Well, I think with Jeff, you guys did it, you did the proof of concept during the request phase, right? Yeah. I think it's fine, yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing, I mean, I have seen people who have done two projects too. They've done proof of concept projects, and when they're done with the proof of concept, so they go open active with the proof of concept, and then they do a follow, like an actual implementation project. Well, and that's happened. I mean, I think, I guess for me, the rule of thumb would be how much visibility. Because I think if it's something, you want to have people's eyes on for resources, for, attention. I think it's important to go open active, but yeah.
Let's revisit that and see if you want to be approved. Because you're dictating, so either just, give us an approval, one of the two. I think so those types of things, but I think just formalizing it, even though I think we will often get the roles from certain folks, that's not their role.
Yeah, I think so. Because you're still really doing analysis. You don't know what you haven't like put your head around what you're actually doing yet.
Having at least something like that.
I think that's great. Again, I think it's a case-by-case basis what makes the most sense. I mean, I think if your proof of concept is going to take 2 years, I think it should be a project.
No, it's not. I mean, you have to be really creative.
Yeah, sorry. It depends is frequently an answer.
Yeah, that's
No, it's really hard to change an intermediate. What we're recommending is you cancel or close the intermediate and open a large. Yeah.
Well, I think, in some of our cases that because of quick development, it's similar for me is to get something on the project that doesn't want to be on the project. Address that as soon as possible. And not go, figure it. It's like, no, just to hit that one head on because
And if you're changing a solution, that's a reason to open another.
but I think it's for stuff like business plan, less of it.
Okay, you guys done pretty much? Okay. Okay, so key takeaways from today. So, depending on the size of your project, usually even if it's a smaller project, you should have some kind of charter, typically know where you're going, even if it's not filling out all the sections. But if you're going open active, you should fill out all the sections. If you're going to demand planning with open active, because some of the smaller projects, like intermediate or something, you might still want to think about the charter, but not necessarily present it. Roles and responsibilities, I think, is important to think about on any project, unless you're doing it by yourself. Then you might not care. Communication plan, and of course, what are you actually going to do? Your work breakdown structure, your schedule. And some tips for getting there, I recommend meeting with your project sponsor, your product owner, meet with your core team, and then meet with your steering committee if you have one. Yes?
At this level, how far down the work breakdown structure do you document?
As far as you need to go to manage the project. Yes?
So it looks like in a perfect world, you have 3 meetings, you're at a charter, you present. Should be like, what, 2 weeks? You're ready to go, right? But for me, it takes a while to figure out milestones and stakeholder time, because at the beginning, you can do most of it, a lot of it, like, you should be able to sit with someone and be like, what are your objectives, what are the deliverables, what are we trying to accomplish? But how we're going to do that, putting together the milestones, who's gonna work on it, how long it's gonna take to work on it, that takes time. So realistically, and I know this like varies, but realistically, what is a reasonable kind of like stake to give yourself between kickoff and when you go open active? Because we have the analysis phase for a reason,
Right.
to figure all this out.
Right. And I wouldn't say it's typically 2 weeks. I think it's a lot longer typically. And Louise and I were just talking about, Josh, you guys did a whole proof of concept during your analysis before you went open active to help define what that project's going to look like. So, I don't think there's really a prescriptive time frame. I think it's, again, the time frame that makes sense for the project that you're doing. But I wouldn't recommend doing the project, doing the request for project all the way and then going active, open active like a week before go live. Sometimes that happens. But, for example, Louise gave the example of, again, they were doing a proof of concept and it turns out it was great and they just wanted to go live with it. But typically that's not really the way that we want to do things, especially for large projects. So, I don't know. I think on average, I think you should be able to get a charter and your milestones and meet with your core team, I would say within 4 to 6 weeks. I think is reasonable. If your project's only going to be 6 months, then you've just eaten into that time frame too, so I would keep that in mind. Again, with project management, I don't feel like there's a one answer for everything. I think it really depends on what you're doing.
So I have a question. So we're kind of here because I've made mistakes, right? So the question that I want to ask here is, so when we're asking, we're hearing, use your common sense, your leeway, but let's talk about what are the absolutely do not do's, right? What are the things that, where can we go wrong with this thing? Can we talk about that?
We can.
What have you seen go wrong in the past?
Wasn't prepared for that question. Well, I things that I've seen going wrong is, again, going open active right before go live. I think that's not good. I think surprises come up. So if you've figured out your whole plan and then we need a whole new, dedicated network tunnel for the project or something, then maybe that was something that should have come up during the analysis phase. I think there was one other thought I had, but it left.
Another one is having an interest, but then having it like trickle off, so the project basically just like lives in red.
Right.
That happens for sure.
Right.
Because you don't have resources.
Right.
Usually.
I think the other thought I had was if the project drags on, so there was an idea to do X and it's been 2 years and we still haven't delivered X and it was supposed to be done in a year or something. I think that kind of stuff can go wrong. So what could you have done in the beginning to not have those things? So clear, defined, minimal viable product, I think, is a big one. No matter what you're doing, whether you're doing a vendor implementation or you're developing in-house, I think it's important to have that conversation and document, what is the minimum thing that we need to deliver to continue to support the business, without getting too fancy. That is one thing that I wish I did on the Orion project, because we didn't have those conversations necessarily up front, and we wound up spending a long time on a part of the business that wasn't really their A game. It was more like their C game, so to speak. I don't know. What other things are things not to do? I think you know, not thinking about all the resources you need, not thinking about a general time frame for the business when it makes sense. I think not thinking about why are we doing this is a big one. Setting that expectation. Does that answer your question? Sort of.
I think another one is, for me, being willing to ask for help from folks, because sometimes we get really caught up in what we're doing and we're like, maybe I'm on the wrong track. So actually consulting with somebody that might have had previous experience to get best practice and then come back and say, hey, I rethought about something and here's a different approach. I've yet to meet someone at the county that's going to call me out for being on the wrong track, as long as I can correct and go down the right path. It's the willingness to ask questions and then also admit if you've gone the wrong direction and you're just like, I'm gonna correct now.
Mhm.
And so having those conversations can be scary, but they're really important because we're all in it to, deliver something.
Yeah, and I mean, any of the PMs on the team are certainly volunteering them, but I mean, part of our team goals is to coach. So, you know, anytime that anybody has questions or is wondering if they should go this way or that way, you know, if they're worried about their work breakdown structure and they want to know if there's enough detail in it, I mean, we're happy to take a look and help you through that. That's part of the reason why we're here. So, happy to do it.
That's the artistic side of project management.
Yeah.
It's like you you adapt it for your situation as creatively as you can.
Yep.
Could I have one?
Yeah.
Trying to find the right way to word it. I guess for me would be there's a sweet spot in terms of documentation, but I think under documenting, it's going back to what we were talking. What about the charter? Is it worth it, right? If the burden is on myself to create the documentation and I'm the only one paying the cost, I should be documenting all the time, right? Because the cost is low. That's my work. That's something that I should be doing, and I've rarely seen that like not come out in a good cost benefit. It's like I took the time and then I needed it and it worked for me. Whereas if I didn't take the time and then I needed it, I'm stuck, right? So, but creating overly burdensome documentation for everybody else out there, that I don't want to do, so it's that level of balance. If it's within my power to document, do it. That would be one for me.
Mm-hmm.
I like the way that's worded, actually, I think.
Yes.
We were talking back here about keeping things like decision logs, because it's easy to forget why you made a decision, and then you have to go back and rehash that. Why did we do that? Was that the right thing to do?
Yep. That's another good artifact. Yep. All right. So I hope that I gave you some things that might set you on a path and ultimately reach your success. Yay!
Apparently they're all drinking right now.
Yeah, apparently. Because apparently drinking at high altitude is just fine. Really good documentary, by the way, if you ever want to see it. I forget what it's called. That's
Since we're creating these documents and artifacts, if I create a project charter, I'm assuming it's going to be in my Google Drive. It'd be nice to be able to see other project charters, information, and other stuff. Can we start looking at forming a central repository of all project charters? For me, it'd be easy just to see references, go across and decide a project, this type of work, what everybody did. You just kind of see everything and what kind of documentation issues they were in. But also, it's going to be coming around the board for records management and having repositories, all this stuff. Wilson's going to be coming for us. So
We do. I mean, we do have. I know all the PMs have all their projects in a Google directory, and then there's a separate project directory for each project. But I don't know. I thought everybody had access to that, but I don't know if they do. So I need to check on that.
I remember when we created that,
Uh-huh.
we said, should we make everybody do it? And we
Right.
thought that would be too big of a crazy burden. But I see no reason why anybody folder that tells you how, there's a whole file, like kind of a README file that gives you instructions on how to do it, because they each follow a similar format.
Yeah, so we have, so within the project, there's subdirectories that we suggest, and then one of them is where the charter would go, so everybody would know where to go find it, basically.
But why not, we can definitely expand that.
Yeah,
Everybody
definitely.
can make their projects.
I know we keep ours by department though too, because we support, and our group supports so many different departments, so it's under the department, and then you've got the structure under it, so that you can find, oh, that was a DCA project, let me go find it.
Right. Yeah, and we do that by the way, we name the project folder the same as it is in Plan View, so it has the department acronym in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can look at setting something like that up, or sharing out what we have.
Wouldn't that be super useful, having, at least coming to a standardized way of storing it? I think that'd be super useful.
Yeah, I mean, it's been useful for me because a lot of times I hate reinventing the wheel, so I go and steal stuff all the time from my fellow project managers.
In that PPM
Uh-huh.
project folder, we just point a link to their,
Yeah,
so they don't have to do anything different, but
That's
it's
true.
seeable from
Yeah.
that folder.
That probably won't be, I mean, I think all of us in our group probably have our own project folders.
Yeah, that's what, we used to have our own project folders, and then we put them in a centralized thing, and I was just, for general government over there, I was thinking, so they don't have to undo that, we could just point to that.
yeah.
I mean, is the new tool going to have a document repository that could be accessible by all? Might be a new requirement.
Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. We're still looking at tools.
The other advantage of having it in a central folder is that, if you leave, or whether by dying or otherwise, no, if you leave.
Get hit by the lottery?
By death by lottery, yeah, or departure by lottery, then it's already there, you don't have to move all your folders and ever.
Well, it also helps, I mean, from a management perspective, right? If there's ever a
Mhm.
question, or if ever I need to go to bat for one of my staff members, it's good to know for me to look at it without having to ask for it, so that I can say, hey, here's what we agreed to your point, right? If it's our contract, then hey, let's look at what we agreed upon. I think having that easily for management, not necessarily the PMs or BSAs, is useful, incredibly useful.
They all have the demand planning name, so it's easy to find them.
Yeah.
Some people are creating websites with all the documentation, associated documentation to it, so,
You could have the link in there, yeah.
Yeah.
different ways.
Okay, we'll take a look at that. Any other questions? All right, thank you guys. Thanks for coming in person.
So that was initiation, and you want on execution?
Worried about it because the integration is going to take turns.
Yeah.
So I was
Yeah.
only looking at cost optics with 2+ approvers. I wasn't looking at 1 and 0. So that's really where I think the gap in sort of my initial analysis came from, was I was looking at preserving those 2+ approvers, and I didn't go quite as deep into the 1s and the 0s. We also kind of just part of, and it wasn't exactly, but I think